My mom praised my sister for saving Dad, until the doctor exposed who really did. Nora Larkins gave something she could never get back. No headlines. No applause. Not even a thank you. Her sister got the flowers. Her mother gave the toast. And Nora sat at that table, invisible, still healing, and said nothing. But silence has a limit. And the truth? The truth had been sitting in a hospital file the entire time. Before we go any further, what do you think happened? Drop your theory in the comments right now. No Googling. Just your gut. Let's see how close you are by the end. The dining room smelled like roasted garlic and fresh-cut roses. Candles burned low in the center of a long oak table dressed in white linen. 32 years of family photographs lined the walls. His vacations, holidays, birthdays, all of them featuring the same 4 faces arranged in the same unspoken order. Marcella at the center. Lysandra beside her, always slightly forward. Elias in the back, always slightly removed. And Nora, there if you looked. Easy to miss if you didn't. Tonight, the house was full. 22 relatives packed around that table and spilling into the adjoining sitting room. Cousins. Aunts. Family friends who had sent casseroles during the hard months. All of them here to celebrate one thing: Elias Larkins was alive. Nora sat near the middle of the table, between her Aunt Vera and a cousin she barely knew anymore. She wore a long-sleeved blouse, dark green, buttoned at the wrist. Underneath the left cuff, a thin scar ran along the inside of her forearm, a quiet, permanent line. She hadn't shown it to anyone tonight. She hadn't planned to. She was cutting into her chicken when her mother stood. Marcella Larkins was the kind of woman who owned a room without raising her voice. She had silver-streaked hair she wore pinned back just loosely enough to seem effortless. Her posture was always straight. Her smile was always timed. She lifted her wine glass and the table fell quiet the way it always did when Marcella decided it should. "I want to say something," she began, her voice catching just slightly, the practiced catch, the one Nora had heard her whole life. "These past 6 months have been the hardest of our lives. There were days I didn't know if we'd be sitting here tonight. But we are. Because of the people who refused to give up." She turned. Not toward Nora. Toward Lysandra. Lysandra sat at Marcella's right hand, as she always did. She was dressed in a cream blouse, hair down, eyes already glassing over with emotion. She pressed a hand to her heart. "Lysandra," Marcella said, and her voice broke on the name like it was something sacred. "You organized the fundraiser. You spoke to the press. You held this family together when I couldn't. You saved your father." The table erupted. Applause. Someone whispered beautiful. An uncle raised his glass. Elias, seated at the far end of the table, lifted his as well, his expression unreadable, somewhere between gratitude and something heavier that no one else seemed to notice. Nora didn't clap. She pressed her fork lightly against the edge of her plate. The metal clicked once against the ceramic. She looked at her food. She breathed. Then her Aunt Vera leaned in close, warm and well-meaning, the way people are when they have no idea what they're standing inside of. "You must be so proud of your sister," Vera whispered. Nora set her fork down. She set it down very slowly, the way you set something down when every muscle in your body is doing the quiet, exhausting work of staying still. She looked at her aunt. She smiled at the small, close-lipped, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes but is convincing enough that no one asks questions. "Of course," Nora said. And she picked up her glass and took a long, slow sip of water. Here is what no one at that table knew, or perhaps what some of them had simply chosen not to ask. 6 months ago, Elias Larkins didn't just get sick. He collapsed at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon in March, between a phone call and a cup of coffee he never got to finish. His assistant found him. The ambulance came. And by Thursday, the diagnosis had been delivered in a small, windowless consultation room where the fluorescent lights buzzed just slightly too loud. Stage 3 cardiac failure. Compounded by a rare blood disorder that had been quietly progressing for years, invisible on routine panels, the kind of thing that hides until it doesn't. His heart was working at 40% capacity. His blood wasn't clotting correctly. And the only intervention with a meaningful chance of long-term survival was a bone marrow transplant, a biological donation from a matched family member. Marcella had handled the news the way she handled most crises, by immediately organizing the response. She scheduled the family meeting. She decided the order of things. Lysandra would be tested first. She's the oldest, Marcella said, when the transplant coordinator asked how they'd like to proceed. It makes sense. Nora wasn't there for that conversation. She heard about it afterward, from her father's nurse, in the parking lot, on her way back from her own routine blood draw. Lysandra's results came back within the week. The coordinator was kind about it. These things are genetic probabilities, not personal failures. Compatibility is complex. Lysandra was not a match. Not close enough for a safe procedure. Nora had already submitted her sample by then. Quietly. Without telling anyone. She'd gone back to the hospital 2 days after the family meeting, signed the forms herself, and given her blood to a lab technician named Priya who had a small succulent on her desk and said, "We'll know in about 5 days." 4 days later, Priya called. Perfect match. Nora sat in her car in the parking garage of her apartment building for a long time after that call. The engine was off. The phone was face down on the passenger seat. Outside, someone was dragging a recycling bin across the pavement, that hollow, scraping sound. She listened to it until it stopped. Then she called the transplant coordinator and said, "I'd like to schedule the consultation." She told her mother that evening. Marcella's response was immediate and efficient. "Good. We'll need to coordinate timing around Lysandra's fundraiser launch." Nora blinked. The fundraiser. She's been planning a community campaign. It's already getting attention. She has a contact at the local news station. It's important for the family's support network. Marcella paused, and then, almost as an afterthought, "Don't make this about yourself, Nora. We're all doing our part." The fundraiser launched 10 days later. Lysandra's face was on the campaign page, a professional photo, warm lighting, the kind of image that says "I am suffering bravely." The goal was $20,000 to cover family expenses during recovery. Within 72 hours it had raised $34,000. A local TV segment ran on a Thursday. Lysandra sat across from the anchor and spoke about doing everything we can and keeping hope alive. Nora's name was not mentioned. On the morning of the donation procedure, Nora woke at 5:15. She showered, dressed, made herself a small bowl of oatmeal she didn't finish. She had been told not to eat after midnight, so the oatmeal was just something to do with her hands. Oliver Crane, her coworker, her closest friend in a way that had never needed to be named or formalized, picked her up at 6. He drove a 10-year-old silver sedan with a cracked dashboard mount and a habit of playing the wrong radio station. He didn't say much on the drive. He didn't need to. He just drove. At the hospital entrance, he put the car in park and looked at her. "I'll be right here," he said. She nodded. Picked up her bag. Walked through the automatic doors. Alone. No family in the waiting room. No mother with a thermos of coffee. No sister sending updates. No father, he was already inpatient, 3 floors up, being prepared on his end. Just Nora, a pre-op nurse named Damien, and the sound of her own breathing. The procedure took 4 hours. She woke up in recovery to a ceiling tile with a small water stain in one corner. Her left side ached. Her mouth was dry. Damien was checking something on a monitor and told her everything had gone smoothly, and that her father was in stable condition and responding well. She said, "Thank you." She didn't cry until she got home 2 days later, alone in her apartment, when she opened her phone and saw that Lysandra's fundraiser post had gone viral overnight. 47,000 shares. Comments flooding in. So brave. What a family. She's an angel. The caption read, "My sister and I are doing everything we can to save our dad. Your support means the world to our family." Nora read it twice. Then she took a screenshot. She opened a folder on her phone she had created that morning, titled, simply, Documented. She dropped the screenshot in. Closed the folder. Set her phone face down on the kitchen counter. Outside her window, the city carried on. Traffic. A siren somewhere far off. Someone laughing on a balcony 2 floors above. Nora pressed both palms flat on the counter and stared at the wall. She didn't post anything. She didn't call anyone. She didn't reach out to her mother or her sister or the local news station to offer a correction. She just added the screenshot to the folder. And she waited. Because here is the thing about Nora Larkins that her family had never quite understood, had perhaps never needed to understand. She was patient in a way that had nothing to do with passivity. She had simply learned, over 31 years in this family, that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one. She had learned that truth doesn't need to be argued. It only needs to be preserved. And she was very, very good at preserving things. The drive home from the celebration dinner took 23 minutes. Nora knew because she counted the traffic lights, 7 of them, and she caught every single one red, as though the city itself was asking her to slow down and sit with what had just happened. She didn't turn on the radio. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the window cracked 2 inches, the night air cutting thin and cool across her left cheek. The scar on her forearm pressed faintly against the fabric of her sleeve. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a healed wound in cold weather, not painful, just present. Just there. She replayed the toast. Not with tears. Not with the hot, ragged feeling of someone who has just been humiliated. She replayed it the way you replay a conversation after the fact, when the noise has cleared and the details sharpen into something you can actually see. You saved your father. Marcella's voice. The practiced catch in it. The way the room had responded, all those lifted glasses, all that warm, willing belief. And Lysandra's face. The hand pressed to her chest. The eyes already wet before the words were even finished. Nora turned onto her street and pulled into her building's parking garage. She sat in the car for a moment after she cut the engine. The garage was quiet, lit in that flat, humming way that makes everything feel slightly underwater. She picked up her phone. She opened the folder she had created weeks ago, the one labeled Documented in plain text, no emoji, no flourish. She scrolled through what was already there. The screenshots of Lysandra's fundraiser posts. The dates of her own medical appointments, typed out and saved as notes. The TV segment thumbnail she had screenshotted the day it aired. Then she added tonight. She typed out a note, timestamped, precise. Recovery dinner. Marcella's toast. Lysandra credited with saving Dad. I was not mentioned. 22 family members present. She listed 3 names, Aunt Vera, Uncle Phil, a cousin named Brent, people who had been sitting close enough to hear clearly, whose faces she had watched as the toast landed. She saved the note. Closed the folder. Got out of the car. In her apartment, she changed out of the green blouse and hung it carefully. She made chamomile tea she didn't really want and stood at her kitchen window watching the street below. A couple walked past with a dog. A delivery driver double-parked and jogged into a building. Ordinary things. Ordinary night. She thought about her father's face during the toast, that expression she had caught from across the table and immediately looked away from, because looking at it too long felt like something she wasn't ready for. He had lifted his glass with everyone else. But his eyes had not been on Lysandra. They had been on Nora. 2 days later, her phone rang at 8:30 in the morning. She was still in her robe, halfway through her first cup of coffee, sitting at the small table by her window with a non-profit grant report open on her laptop. She looked at the screen. "Dad." She answered on the second ring. "Nora." His voice was different. She noticed it immediately, not the careful, measured tone he used at family gatherings, not the slightly detached warmth he deployed when Marcella was in the room. This was quieter. Heavier. The voice of a man who had set something down and wasn't picking it back up. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better," he said. "And then, without preamble, I saw your face at the dinner." She was quiet. "I've been seeing it for years, Nora. I told myself stories about it. That you were fine. That you were strong. That you didn't need what I wasn't giving you." He stopped. She heard him exhale, long, slow. "I don't have the right words for what I want to say yet. I'm working on them. But I need you to know that I've been meeting with my attorney." "About what?" "About making things right." A pause. "I can't tell you the specifics yet. Not until it's done. But it's being done." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, a sparrow landed on the windowsill and was gone just as fast. "Okay," she said. "There's something else." His voice shifted, careful now, precise in the way it gets when someone is choosing words they've rehearsed. "Don't trust everything you've been told about what happened in that hospital. Around the time of your procedure." Nora went very still. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," he said slowly, "that I learned something recently that I'm still trying to understand myself. And when I've fully understood it, when everything is in order, I'll tell you everything." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "Dad." "Not yet," he said gently. "Just keep the folder." The line was quiet for a beat. "How do you know about the folder?" she asked. And he said, very quietly, "Because I know you, Nora. I've always known you. I just didn't always act like it." The call ended. She sat at the table with her coffee going cold and her laptop open and the grant report blurring in front of her eyes, and she thought about what he had said, not the parts she understood, but the part she didn't. Don't trust everything you've been told about what happened in that hospital. She saved the date and time of the call in her folder. Added a note. Then she closed her laptop and got dressed. She found out about the family meeting from Oliver. He sent her a text on a Thursday morning, no greeting, no preamble, just, FYI, a meeting at the Larkins' house this Saturday. 10 a.m., your mom called Silas at the office. Something about operational restructuring. You weren't on the invite. She read it twice. Then she typed back, "Thanks. I'll be there." Oliver's reply came after a pause that felt like him deciding whether to talk her out of it, figured. The Larkins family home had a formal sitting room that Marcella had always reserved for occasions that required the appearance of seriousness. Cream walls. Framed botanical prints. A wingback chair no one ever actually sat in. On Saturday morning it had been arranged into something resembling a boardroom, chairs set in a rough semicircle, a legal pad on the coffee table, Marcella at the center of it all. Lysandra was already seated when Nora arrived. So were two of the company's senior staff members, a man named Silas who ran logistics, and a woman named Petra from accounting. They looked up when Nora walked in. Petra's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a small tightening, like someone who had just remembered something they'd forgotten to mention. Marcella looked up last. Her jaw tightened. Just barely. Just for a second. "This is a family meeting, Nora." Nora set her bag down on the empty chair beside Petra and sat in the one next to it. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." The room didn't quite know what to do with that. Silas looked at his notepad. Petra found something interesting to study on the wall. Lysandra's eyes moved to Marcella and stayed there, waiting. Marcella recovered smoothly, she always did. We're discussing the interim management structure for Larkin's Med Corps while your father continues his recovery. Given the circumstances, we think it's important to have clear leadership in place. I agree, Nora said. Another fractional pause. Marcella continued. Lysandra was presented as interim operations lead, positioned as a natural fit given her public profile and existing community relationships. Her fundraiser work was cited. Her media presence. Her ability to represent the Larkins' name during a sensitive period. Then came the offer for Nora. We thought you might serve in an advisory capacity, Marcella said. Her tone was generous, the way a landlord is generous when they're explaining a lease clause you have no power to negotiate. Symbolic, really. Your input on matters where it's appropriate. Symbolic. Nora let the words sit in the room for a moment. She looked at Marcella. Then at Lysandra, whose expression held the very careful blankness of someone trying not to look relieved. Then she smiled, a small, unhurried, the kind of smile that doesn't announce itself. Of course, she said. Whatever helps Dad. Marcella's shoulders eased. Lysandra uncrossed and recrossed her legs. Silas made a note on his legal pad. The room relaxed in the way rooms do when they believe a problem has resolved itself. Nora picked up her bag. She thanked everyone for including her. She shook Silas's hand and nodded at Petra and told her mother she'd see herself out. She drove home the long way. The folder on her phone was already open before she reached the first traffic light. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Tobias Hale was scheduled for a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, 6 weeks post-procedure. Standard protocol, a blood panel, a brief physical assessment, a conversation about how the body was reintegrating after the donation. Nora had been to 2 of these already. She expected this one to be the same. She sat in the consultation room in a paper gown that crinkled every time she moved. The room smelled like antiseptic and the faint ghost of someone's hand lotion. A poster on the wall diagrammed the human lymphatic system in cheerful primary colors. Dr. Tobias Hale came in at 2:12. He was a measured man, late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of careful stillness that comes from years of delivering news in rooms like this one. He reviewed her chart. Asked the standard questions. Checked her vitals and the site of the procedure with practiced hands. Then he sat down across from her, and something in the quality of his attention changed. Not alarming. Just careful. Everything looks good, he said. Your recovery has been excellent. He paused. Folded his hands on the desk. I did want to talk to you about something before you go. Something that was brought to our attention during the pre-procedure period. Nora waited. You know, he said, almost clinically, your procedure almost didn't go forward. She stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. What do you mean? She asked. Dr. Hale's expression was measured, the face of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and was now delivering it with the precision of someone who understood its weight. In the week before your surgery, he said, the hospital received a formal request addressed to our ethics board. The request asked us to initiate a review of the consent process for your donation, specifically, to delay the procedure pending an independent psychological evaluation of the donor. Nora's hands were very still in her lap. The claim, he continued, was that the donor, you, may have been operating under psychological distress and possible family coercion, and therefore may not have been giving fully informed, voluntary consent. The fluorescent light above the desk hummed faintly. The lymphatic system poster smiled its cheerful primary color smile. A review of that nature, Dr. Hale said, would have triggered a mandatory 48 to 72-hour hold on the procedure. Given your father's condition at that time, the critical window for the transplant, a delay of that length would have significantly compromised the viability of the intervention. Nora understood what he was not saying directly. A delay would not just have postponed the surgery. It could have killed her father. Who filed it? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. Dr. Hale looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "That's part of why I wanted to speak with you today. I need to pause right here, because what Dr. Hale says next changes everything. Before I tell you, comment A if you think it was her mother. Comment B if you think it was her sister. Drop it right now. I'll tell you in just a moment." Dr. Hale reached into the folder on his desk and slid a single document across the surface toward her. Nora looked down at it. The header read, Ethics Board Inquiry, Formal Filing Record. Below it, a case number. A date, 4 days before her surgery. A summary of the complaint in 2 tight paragraphs of clinical language. And at the bottom of the page, in the field marked Filing Party. Marcella Larkins. Relationship to patient, mother. The stated reason, typed in the clean, impersonal font of official documentation, donor psychological instability and family coercion concerns. Nora read it once. Then she read it again, not because she hadn't understood it the first time, but because she needed a second pass to let the shape of it fully form. The shape of what her mother had actually done. What she had tried to do. If the surgery was delayed past the critical window and Elias died, his estate, under the existing will, defaulted to Marcella. Every asset. The house. The accounts. The controlling interest in Larkins MedCorp. All of it. If he survived, if Nora's donation worked, if the man lived, he might wake up changed. He might look at what had happened and make different decisions. He might rewrite things. Marcella had filed that complaint not to protect Nora. She had filed it to protect the version of the future where Elias didn't make it. Quietly. Legally. Deniably. "I'd like the full ethics committee report," Nora said. "Every page." Dr. Hale nodded slowly. "I anticipated that." He reached back into the folder and produced a document held together with a small binder clip, 12 pages, time-stamped, signed by 3 committee members. He slid it across the desk. Nora picked it up. She did not scan it or skim it. She folded it in half along the spine, aligned the edges precisely, and placed it flat in the bottom of her bag. "Thank you," she said. She got dressed behind the privacy curtain. She thanked the nurse at the front desk. She walked through the automatic doors into the afternoon light, pale and slightly watery, the kind of light that comes on overcast October days when the sun is there but not quite present. She got in her car. She did not turn on the radio. She did not cry. She drove home through 4 traffic lights, all of them green this time, and she thought, not in a spiraling way, but in the focused, geometrical way she thought when she was solving a problem, about what she now held in her bag, and what it meant, and what came next. She was heating leftover soup for dinner when her phone rang at 7:43 that evening. An unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. "Ms. Larkins?" "Yes. This is Malcolm Voss. I'm an estate and corporate attorney. I represent your father, Elias Larkins. He asked me to contact you this evening. He said you'd be expecting to hear from someone." She turned the stove off. "I'm listening," she said. Malcolm Voss spoke with the even, unhurried precision of a man who had spent decades making certain his words could not be misunderstood. He had finalized several legal instruments on behalf of Elias Larkins, he said, all executed with full legal capacity, witnessed and notarized, effective immediately or upon conditions already met. The first, medical power of attorney. Effective as of the previous Friday. All healthcare decision-making authority for Elias Larkins had been transferred from Marcella Larkins to Nora Larkins. The second, life insurance policy. Face value $1.8 million. The beneficiary designation had been changed from Marcella Larkins, primary, to Nora Larkins, primary. Irrevocable. The third, and Malcolm Voss paused here, just briefly, the way people pause before a sentence they know will land differently than the ones before it, The third was a transfer of 52% of the voting shares of Larkin's Medcorp, held in an irrevocable trust, with Nora Larkins named as the sole beneficiary and controlling interest holder. The trust had been established 10 days ago. It could not be undone. Nora sat down on her kitchen floor. Not dramatically, she simply found herself sitting, the phone still pressed to her ear, her back against the cabinet, the soup cooling on the stove. "Ms. Larkins?" Malcolm Voss said. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here." He gave her the documentation reference numbers. Told her copies would arrive by courier the following morning. Told her she could call his office any time with questions. Gave her his direct line. She thanked him. The call ended. She sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Then she opened her phone. Opened the folder labeled Documented. Added a new entry, timestamped, precise, with the attorney's name, the call time, and the 3 changes her father had made. She saved Malcolm Voss's number. She forwarded his follow-up confirmation email to herself and dropped it into the folder. Then she got up, reheated her soup, and ate it standing at the counter. It was Petra from accounting who told Oliver. Not deliberately, she mentioned it in passing, the way people mention things they assume are already widely known. Lysandra had tried to log into the company's financial management portal that Thursday morning and found her credentials suspended. She had called IT. IT had escalated it. And somewhere in that chain, the word had reached Petra, who had stored it away the way careful people store things. By the time Oliver texted Nora, just 3 words, she got locked out. Lysandra had already called Marcella twice. Marcella had called Malcolm Voss's office directly. His assistant had taken the message politely and informed her that Mr. Voss was not available to discuss the affairs of another client. When Marcella pressed, her voice taking on the particular edge it developed when obstacles appeared, the assistant repeated herself with the same serene professionalism and wished her a good afternoon. Marcella hung up and stood in the kitchen of the family home with her phone in her hand and the particular stillness of a person calculating. A housekeeper named Rosie was passing through the hallway on the other side of the kitchen door. She heard Marcella's voice, low and tight, speaking to Lysandra, "We need to move before she realizes what she has." Rosie kept walking. She didn't say anything to anyone that day. But she remembered it. The way you remember something said in a certain tone, the tone of something that has already gone wrong and is only now being understood. Nora, sitting at her desk at the non-profit office the next morning, added that detail to the folder when Oliver told her. She didn't react visibly. She just nodded, opened her phone under the desk, and typed it in. Then she looked up at Oliver across the shared workspace. He was watching her with the careful, patient expression of someone who has understood for a long time that they are not required to ask questions to be useful. "They're going to make a move," she said. "Probably," he said. She looked back at her screen. "Then I need to move first." Marcella moved the way she always moved when she felt the ground shifting beneath her, decisively, and with the appearance of calm. She made 2 calls on a Sunday evening, back to back, from the small study off the master bedroom where she kept the door closed when conversations needed to stay contained. The first was to a board member named Gerald Fitch, a man who had known Elias since their early days building the business, who had always liked Marcella's efficiency, who had attended the Larkins' Christmas parties for 11 consecutive years and considered himself a family friend. The second was to a woman named Patricia Wall, who held a non-executive seat and had twice been guided into favorable decisions by Marcella's particular brand of quiet influence. The framing was careful. It was always careful with Marcella. She didn't say she wanted to remove Nora. She said she was concerned. Concerned about the company's stability during a sensitive period. Concerned about leadership inexperience at a critical juncture. Concerned, and she said this with the weighted restraint of a woman who hated to even suggest it, that certain recent legal changes made by Elias during his recovery may have been made under emotional distress rather than sound judgment. Gerald Fitch listened. Patricia Wall asked 2 questions. By the end of the second call, Marcella had what she needed, an agreement to support an emergency board session on Thursday to review the company's current governance structure. The implicit understanding, Nora's authority would be questioned, her position made untenable, and Lysandra, experienced, familiar, publicly credible, would be confirmed as the stabilizing choice. Lysandra spent the following day drafting the memo. It was 3 pages. Professionally formatted. It outlined, in the language of corporate continuity, why interim leadership should be vested in someone with established operational familiarity and stakeholder relationships. It referenced the fundraiser. It referenced community visibility. It referenced, obliquely, the importance of leadership stability in the context of a principal shareholder's ongoing health recovery. It did not mention Nora by name. It didn't need to. The meeting was confirmed for Thursday at 10 in the morning. The invitations went out Monday afternoon. Oliver set the memo on Nora's desk on Tuesday morning without saying a word. He had intercepted a forwarded copy, sent mistakenly to a shared distribution list that included his work address. He printed it, folded it once, and walked it to her desk the way you carry something you're relieved to hand off to the right person. Nora picked it up. Read it straight through. Set it back down on the desk with the same care you'd use setting down a full glass of water. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at Oliver. Book the boardroom for Wednesday. He blinked once. That's a day before theirs. I know, she said. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and went back to his desk. She worked for 2 days with the particular focus of someone who is not angry, who has moved past anger into something colder and more useful. Anger is noise. What Nora had was clarity. She laid everything out on her dining room table Tuesday evening. The Ethics Committee report, all 12 pages, tabbed. The irrevocable trust documentation from Malcolm Voss, with the relevant sections flagged in a thin strip of yellow. The hospital records confirming the procedure date, the donor identity, the outcome. The fundraiser screenshots, printed, dated, arranged chronologically to show the deliberate arc of a narrative being constructed in public while a different story was happening in private. And the letter. Elias had written it by hand on cream-colored stationery, 4 pages, dated 5 weeks ago, witnessed by Malcolm Voss and his cardiologist, Dr. Renata Osei. His handwriting was slightly uneven in places, the way handwriting gets after illness, not fragile, just honest. He had written about what he had observed over 30 years. The hierarchy Marcella had constructed and maintained. The specific incidents he had watched and said nothing about. The fundraiser. The toast. And one other thing, a thing he had only recently fully understood, about a phone call he had received from a hospital administrator in the days after the surgery, asking him to confirm that the ethics board filing had been resolved to his satisfaction. He hadn't known about the filing until that moment. He wrote about learning about it. About sitting with what it meant. About understanding, finally and completely, the nature of the thing he had spent 30 years enabling by staying quiet. I am not asking for forgiveness, he wrote near the end. I am asking for accuracy. My daughter Nora gave part of her body to keep me alive. I intend to spend whatever time I have left making certain that is the thing people know. Nora read the letter twice. Then she placed it back in its folder and left it on the table and went to bed. She rehearsed the presentation once the following morning, standing in her kitchen, speaking aloud to the window above the sink, voice measured, pace deliberate. She went through it start to finish without stopping. Then she put it away, packed the documents in order into a slim leather portfolio Oliver had lent her, and got dressed. The call came at 8:47 that evening, the night before the Wednesday meeting. She was in the middle of pressing her blouse for the next morning when her phone lit up on the bathroom counter. Mom. She set the iron down. Answered. Nora, sweetheart. Marcella's voice was warm, the particular warmth she deployed like a tool, precise and purposeful. I've been thinking about you. I think we should talk before things get complicated. Nora looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was calm. She had a small line between her brows that appeared when she was thinking hard. She watched it smooth. I agree, she said. I'll see you tomorrow. A pause. Brief, barely a second, but Nora heard it. Tomorrow, Marcella repeated. Of course. Sleep well, sweetheart. The line went quiet. On the other end, in the family home's small study, door closed, Marcella lowered the phone and stood with it in both hands. Behind her, in the doorway, Lysandra had been leaning against the frame, listening. She knows, doesn't she? Lysandra said. Marcella set the phone face down on the desk. Her voice, when it came, was even and certain. She doesn't know anything. But she did not turn around. And her hands, pressed flat against the surface of the desk, were trembling, just slightly, just at the fingertips, in the way hands tremble when the body understands something the mind is still refusing to say out loud. The Larkins MedCorp boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the third floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the flat, gray light of a Wednesday morning in late October. A long mahogany table. 8 chairs. A credenza along the wall with a water carafe and glasses and a small tray of pens nobody ever used. Nora arrived at 7:58. She arranged the packets herself, one for each board member, each one containing the same documents in the same order, paper-clipped cleanly. She placed one at every seat. Then she sat down at the head of the table, opened her portfolio, and waited. The board members filtered in between 8:15 and 8:40. Some greeted her with the slightly uncertain warmth of people who weren't sure what they were walking into. Sandra Okafor, a woman in her 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the attentive eyes of someone who reads everything, picked up the packet at her seat immediately and began leafing through it before she even sat down fully. Gerald Fitch came in at 8:35 and stopped when he saw Nora at the head of the table. His eyes moved to the packet in front of his seat. He sat down slowly and did not touch it yet. Marcella and Lysandra arrived together at 8:42. They came through the door with the coordinated ease of two people who had walked into rooms together for years, Marcella half a step ahead, Lysandra at her shoulder. Marcella was in a charcoal blazer, pearl earrings, her silver hair pinned back in its customary way. She looked, as she always looked, like someone who had already decided how this was going to go. She saw Nora. Her step didn't stop. But it faltered, a single fraction of a second, the slightest hesitation in her left foot, so small that only someone who had spent a lifetime watching Marcella Larkins walk into rooms would have caught it. Nora gestured to the remaining seats. Please, she said. Sit down. The room settled. Nora let it settle fully, let the quiet go long enough that everyone in the room was paying attention before she opened her mouth. Then she reached into her portfolio and removed the first document. I'll keep this straightforward, she said. She placed a copy of the irrevocable trust in front of each board member, a clean, practiced motion, moving around the table without rushing. As of 14 days ago, I hold 52% controlling interest in Larkins MedCorp, vested through an irrevocable trust executed by my father, Elias Larkins, with full legal capacity, witnessed and notarized. I wanted to begin there so we're all working from the same foundation. The silence in the room was total. Lysandra's pen, which had been moving across the top of her notepad, stopped. Gerald Fitch looked down at the document in front of him. Then up at Marcella. Then back at the document. Marcella's face had not moved. Nora returned to her seat. The second document in your packet, she said, is a report issued by this hospital's ethics board. I'd like to read a section of it aloud. She found the page. She did not read dramatically. She did not slow down for effect or speed up for emphasis. She read it the way you read something when you want every word to land on its own weight. The filing date. The complaint. The stated grounds, donor psychological instability and family coercion concerns. The name of the filing party. The potential consequences of the requested delay, as outlined by the transplant team. The timeline, 4 days before her surgery. The critical window that would have been compromised. She placed a copy in front of each board member. My father nearly died, she said, not from his illness, but because someone filed a legal request to stop the one procedure that could save him. I want the board to understand the full context of the leadership decisions being proposed. Marcella's face was completely still. The kind of still that is not peace, that is the absolute muscular effort of a person holding every expression in check at once. If you felt that tightening in your chest right now, that's exactly the right reaction. Hit like so more people find this story. Keep watching. We are not done yet. Lysandra moved first. Her chair scraped back, not enough to stand, just enough to signal the surge of something she couldn't contain. Her voice came out tight and rising, you can't come in here and, this is a family matter. This has nothing to do with Lysandra. Nora's voice was quiet. Completely level. The kind of level that lands harder than volume. We're at a board meeting, she said. Not a dinner table. The room went still again. Sandra Okafor, who had been reading the ethics report with both hands flat on the table, did not look up. She just kept reading, slowly, deliberately, to the end of the page. Marcella stood. She stood the way she always stood when she was about to reframe a situation, straight-backed, measured, the pearl earrings catching the gray window light. Her voice, when it came, was composed and resonant and full of the quiet authority of someone who has been trusted in rooms like this one for a very long time. I want to address the board directly, she said. Nora has been through an extraordinarily difficult medical experience. The documents she's presenting are being taken out of context, and I think we all understand that grief and physical trauma can shape how a person interprets events. She paused, the pause of someone who has learned that silence makes people lean in. I have given 30 years to this company and to this family. I've sat at this table through every challenge we've faced. I don't think it serves anyone to. Nora reached into her portfolio and removed the final document. She slid it across the table, not to Marcella. To the center, where everyone could reach it. My father anticipated this moment, she said. He wrote this letter 4 weeks ago, with his estate attorney and his cardiologist present as witnesses. I'll give everyone a moment to read it. Marcella stopped speaking. The packets moved. The letter circulated. Sandra Okafor read it first, then passed it left. Gerald Fitch read it with his hands very still and his expression very careful. The board member to Nora's right, a man named Desmond who had always been the quietest person in any room, read it twice before setting it down. The silence was total. Not uncomfortable, definitive. The silence of a room that has just received information it cannot unknow. Marcella was still standing. She had not sat back down. Something in her face had shifted, finally, not broken, not collapsed, but changed, the way a building changes when the thing holding its facade in place is quietly removed. Nora looked at her. Then she looked at the board. I'd like to call the motion, she said. She laid it out plainly. Marcella Larkins removed from the position of Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. Lysandra Larkins's interim operations role dissolved. An external interim Chief Executive Officer to be appointed by the board pending a full executive search, with compensation and authority to be determined by standard governance process. As majority shareholder, Nora said, I cast my vote in favor of all 3 motions. Sandra Okafor voted yes without hesitation. Desmond voted yes. Gerald Fitch looked at the letter one more time. Then he looked at Nora. Then he voted yes. The remaining 2 board members, both of whom had been watching Marcella's face through the entire presentation, voted yes. 5-1. The single dissenting vote cast by Lysandra, who did not hold voting shares, whose presence at the table in any formal capacity had just been dissolved, and whose voice had therefore no standing in the outcome. The motions carried. Marcella stood at her seat for a moment after the vote was recorded. She did not look at the documents. She did not look at the board members. She looked at Nora, directly, fully, for the first time since she had walked through the door, with an expression that Nora could not entirely read and did not try to name. Then Marcella straightened her jacket. The lapels. The cuffs. Each one adjusted with the precise, habitual care of a woman who has always understood that appearance is the last thing you surrender. She walked out. No words. No scene. Just the sound of her heels on the hardwood and then the soft, definitive click of the boardroom door pulling shut behind her. Lysandra stood. She gathered nothing from the table, there was nothing at her seat that was hers to take. She walked toward the door, and she would have followed her mother through it without pausing, except that at the threshold she stopped. She turned. She looked back at Nora across the length of the room, across the long mahogany table, across the scattered documents, across everything that had just irrevocably shifted. Her expression held something that was not quite anger and not quite grief and not quite recognition, but contained traces of all three. A long beat. The two sisters looked at each other in the way people sometimes look at each other after something has ended, not reaching for it, not fighting it, just registering it. Then Lysandra walked out. The door clicked shut a second time. Nora sat at the head of the table in the flat October light. Around her, the board members were quiet, gathering papers, exchanging low words, the soft sounds of a room beginning to exhale. Sandra Okafor caught Nora's eye from across the table and gave her a single, small nod, the nod of someone who has just watched something that needed to happen. Nora nodded back. Then she closed her portfolio, aligned the edges, and set it flat on the table in front of her. Outside the windows, the city moved in its ordinary way. Cars. A pigeon on the ledge. Clouds moving west. She sat with it for a moment, not triumphant, not relieved, not hollow. Just present. Just here, in this room, at this table, exactly where the long, patient work of the last several months had brought her. Then she picked up her portfolio, pushed back her chair, and stood up. By noon on Wednesday, the news had moved the way news moves through families, not in announcements, but in phone calls that lasted too long, in texts that asked careful questions, in the particular silence of people deciding how much they already knew and how much they were willing to admit. Nora was at her desk at the nonprofit when the first message came in. Her cousin Brent, the one who had been seated 2 chairs down at the recovery dinner, the one whose face she had noted in her folder that night. His text was short, "I heard what happened. I just want you to know, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." She read it. Set her phone face down. Picked it back up and read it again. She typed, "Thank you, Brent," and sent it. Over the next several hours, more came. Aunt Vera called and cried for 4 minutes before she found words, and the words she found were the words people find when they have been carrying quiet guilt for a long time and finally have permission to put it down. An uncle she hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent a single line, "Your father is a good man. So are you." A family friend who had attended the recovery dinner sent a voice note, rambling, earnest, the voice of someone who had replayed a particular moment many times and finally understood what they had been watching. Some people said nothing. Their silence was its own kind of statement, the silence of people who had benefited from the story as it was told, and were not yet ready to hold a different version. Nora didn't chase any of them. She replied to what felt genuine, left the rest, and went back to work. Her father called 4 days after the board meeting and asked if she would meet him for coffee. Not at the family home. At a small place near his cardiologist's office, a corner cafe with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and the kind of unassuming atmosphere that asks nothing of the people inside it. She got there first. Ordered a black coffee. Sat at a table by the window. Elias came in 12 minutes later, moving more slowly than he used to, the careful, deliberate pace of a body that had been through something significant and was still in conversation with its own recovery. He wore a gray sweater. He looked thinner than she remembered, and older, and somehow more himself than she had seen him in years, as though illness had stripped away some layer he had been carrying without knowing it. He sat down across from her. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, fully, steadily, the way you look at someone when you are done managing what your face does in their presence. Like he was seeing her and not filtering it. Not calculating the cost of what he was looking at. She held his gaze. Let it happen. The cafe moved around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, a barista calling out an order, two women at a nearby table talking about something that had nothing to do with any of this. Ordinary life, doing what it always does, indifferent and continuous. I should have done this a long time ago, Elias said. His voice was quiet. Not rehearsed. The words of a man who had sat with this specific sentence for weeks and was now simply releasing it. Nora wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, a woman walked past with a stroller, head down against the wind. The leaves on the sidewalk tree were almost entirely gone, just a few left, pale yellow, stubborn. Yes, she said. But you did it. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded, once, slow, and something in his posture shifted, very slightly, the way a person shifts when they have been braced for something and the bracing is no longer necessary. They sat together for an hour and 20 minutes. They talked about his recovery, the medications, the fatigue that still came in waves, the small daily disciplines of a body rebuilding itself. They talked about her work at the nonprofit. They talked, carefully and honestly, about things that had never been spoken in the Larkins household, incidents from years ago that each of them had stored separately and was only now discovering the other had also kept. The conversation was not easy. It was not meant to be. But it was real in a way that almost nothing between them had been allowed to be before, and that realness had its own particular weight, not painful exactly, but substantial, like something you had been carrying at an angle for years and were finally setting down correctly. When they stood to leave, Elias hugged her. It was not the brief, performed embrace of family gatherings. He held on, for 3 or 4 full seconds, the way you hold on when you mean it, when you are aware of what the gesture is and you are making it anyway, deliberately, without hurrying out of it. She let him. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Elias filed for legal separation. He moved into a smaller house on the other side of the city, a 2-bedroom place near a park, with a front porch and a manageable garden and none of the formal architecture of the family home. The kind of house where a person could think clearly. Where the rooms were sized to actual life rather than to appearances. Marcella retained a lawyer within 48 hours. The lawyer was good, thorough, experienced, the kind of representation you hire when you intend to fight. But the fight, when it came to the specifics, found very little purchase. The irrevocable trust was exactly that, irrevocable. The insurance beneficiary change had been executed cleanly. The medical power of attorney was legally unambiguous. Every instrument Elias had put in place had been built, with Malcolm Voss's meticulous guidance, to withstand precisely the kind of challenge now being mounted. The narrative leverage was gone too. The ethics board report was a matter of institutional record. Elias's letter existed in witnessed, notarized form. The story that Marcella had spent months constructing, the one where Lysandra was the savior, where the family had rallied, where her own role was that of the devoted, steadying wife, had been quietly, completely, and permanently replaced by the documented one. Her lawyer found the walls and reported back. The settlement negotiations began. Lysandra called on a Thursday evening, 5 weeks after the board meeting. Nora was on her couch with a book she wasn't really reading when the phone rang. She answered. There was a pause on the other end, the pause of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was now, in the actual moment, finding that none of it was quite right. Did you always know, Lysandra finally said, that you were going to do this? Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Not even, can we talk about what happened? Just the question, stripped of everything except its own honest curiosity. Nora thought about it. She gave it the 10 seconds it deserved before she answered. "No," she said. "I just knew I was going to stop pretending it wasn't happening." The line was quiet. Then it went dead. Lysandra had hung up. Nora held the phone in her hand for a moment, looking at the dark screen. Then she set it on the cushion beside her and picked up her book. It was the most honest exchange she and Lysandra had ever had. No performance in it. No management. Just two people speaking without the architecture the family had built around every conversation they'd ever shared. It was the beginning of something, or it was nothing at all, she didn't know which yet, and she decided she didn't need to. In January, Nora appointed an external CEO for Larkin's MedCorp, a woman named Dr. Renee Castillo, who had spent 15 years in medical supply chain management and brought with her the kind of structural competence the company had been quietly lacking for years. Nora took a salary, modest, deliberate, enough to provide the financial stability that let her stop calculating, not enough to reorient her life around it. The Larkin's Donor Fund launched in February. It was not a large operation, not at first. A website. A partnership with 2 hospital networks. A small grants program to help living organ and marrow donors cover the financial gaps that appeared during recovery, the lost wages, the out-of-pocket medical costs, the quiet financial hemorrhage that came from giving something of yourself and then being expected to simply return to normal life as though nothing had changed. The first grant went to a 34-year-old man from Ohio who had donated a kidney to his brother and spent 9 months trying to cover the difference between his disability pay and his actual bills. He sent a handwritten note afterward. Nora kept it in the same folder where she had kept everything else. She still worked at the nonprofit. 4 days a week, same as before. The work she had chosen before any of this had happened, before the diagnosis, before the surgery, before the toast that had cracked something open that turned out, when she looked at it clearly, to have been cracked for a long time. It was her work and she claimed it completely, without apology. She had always known what she was worth. It was only the noise that had made it hard to hear. In March, the hospital volunteer coordinator asked if she'd be willing to sit with pre-procedure patients, people in the hours before significant medical events who needed someone present. Not a nurse. Not a counselor. Just a person who had been in that room and come out the other side. She said yes. On a Tuesday morning in late March, she sat in a waiting room with a young woman named Kara, 26 years old, 3 hours from undergoing a bone marrow donation for her father. Kara had her hands folded in her lap and was staring at a point on the floor just past her shoes with the fixed, glassy focus of someone who is trying to be brave about something very large. Nora sat beside her. Not too close. Not performing comfort. After a while, Kara said, "I keep thinking, what if nobody understands what this cost me? What if they just move on after? Like I was just a thing that happened?" Nora looked at her. "You're going to feel invisible for a while," she said. "People will miss what you did. They'll celebrate the wrong things. They'll get the story a little, or a lot, wrong." She paused. "But you will know. And eventually, so will everyone else." Kara looked at her for the first time since she'd sat down. "How do you know that?" Nora's smile came slowly, quiet, unhurried, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "Because," she said, "I've been exactly where you are." Nora Larkins never set out to win. She set out to survive, with her integrity intact, with her truth preserved, with the documentation to prove what had happened when the time came to prove it. Here is what her story teaches us: the most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one. It is not the one with the wine glass raised and the polished toast and the camera-ready tears. It is the one who has been quietly paying attention. The one who gave without expecting a receipt. The one who, when the moment finally came, didn't rage and didn't beg and didn't collapse, she simply laid the truth on the table and let it do what truth, when properly preserved, always does. She didn't need the applause. She never had. She needed to be seen accurately, fully, on her own terms. In the end, she made sure of it herself. If this story hit differently, if some part of Nora's journey felt familiar, if you recognized something in the way she moved through rooms where her name was never called, the subscribe button is right there. More stories like this every week. And if someone in your life needs to hear this right now, not someday, right now, share it once. That's all it takes.